Hi all, and welcome to this week's Chinuch Hashkafa message. It's Parshas Korach. This week I want to dedicate this message to the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose 28th yahrzeit is this coming Shabbos, Gimmel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz. Let me begin with the vort that he explains on the Parsha. Parshas Korach, according to many opinions, came after the story of the Meraglim. This is hinted in Rashi as well. And the question is, if Korach had a problem with Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, why did he wait until after the story of the Meraglim, which came a number of months later, after Moshe and Aaron were appointed as leaders? Why did he wait so long until he launched his campaign? So one of the explanations that the Rebbe explains on a deeper level is the following. Parshas Shlach and Parshas Korach are connected. The Meraglim, when they came back and spoke negatively about the land of Eretz Yisrael, according to Likutei Torah, had actually a very good intention. They were worried about the Yidden going into Eretz Yisrael. They were worried about Bnei Yisrael leaving the spiritual protection, the learning, the spirituality that was happening in the Midbar, and leaving that protected world to a world of action, to a world where they have to plow the fields, sow the seeds, and be involved in a physical and mundane life experience in mundane society, which might harm them spiritually. So they actually wanted to protect the Jewish people, and therefore spoke negatively about Eretz Yisrael to keep them in the Midbar. They made a fundamental mistake, of course, because the purpose of creation is mitzvahs. The purpose of creation is to elevate the physical world. The purpose of creation is olam hamaisa, the world of action, the world to actually go and elevate the earth, elevate the physical world by taking physical objects and doing mitzvahs with them, like tefillin and mezuzah and tzedakah and so on and so forth. And that was their terrible mistake. It was at this point that Korach launched his campaign. When Korach understood the lesson from the Meraglim, that the purpose of creation was the world of action, as we say, Hamaisa Hua Iker, action is the main thing. He said, well, if that's the case, why do we need spiritual leadership? If the purpose is just Torah, if the purpose is spirituality, so he understood that when it comes to the spiritual reality, there are different madregas, there are different levels. Moshe Rabbeinu is a much higher level than the rest of us. Moshe and Aaron were greater than Korach. He understood that. But now that you come and tell me that no, the Meraglim made such a fundamental mistake, and the purpose is to go into Eretz Yisrael to keep mitzvahs, maisias, real action, proper physical mitzvahs. Well, if that's the case, why do we need a hierarchy? Surely Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin and my tefillin are the same. Moshe Rabbeinu's mezuzah, my mezuzah are the same. So why the hierarchy? Why the leadership? Why the greatness of Moshe and Aaron as opposed to the rest of Bnei Yisrael? Ki chol ha'ela kulam kadosh. We're all holy. When it comes to mitzvahs, we all keep mitzvahs the same. So he launched his attack against Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership. But he made a terrible mistake. What Korach didn't understand is that it's not one or the other, you need both. Yes, of course, mitzvahs are the tachlis. The Torah cannot remain without mitzvahs. It has to lead to mitzvahs, maisias, to physical actions. But at the same time, those mitzvahs have to be living mitzvahs. The Yiddishkeit that we do cannot just be robotic. It's got to be a living Yiddishkeit. It's got to be filled with meaning, with depth. And therefore, limud HaTorah, learning Torah, becomes an equally important component to the equation. Because if you keep a mitzvah without kavanah, it's like a guf without a neshama. If you keep mitzvahs without learning, the mitzvah is not a lebedik mitzvah, it's not a living mitzvah. And that was his mistake. Therefore, from the rebellion of Korach, we understand the importance of not changing one for another, not saying, well, it's okay, I keep mitzvahs, I don't have to learn so much. But no, there has to be spirituality, there has to be ruchnis, there has to be learning. And that was Korach's mistake. It's a nice Dvar Torah to share with our children, but let me just add to it. And let me tell you a little story. How we have to talk about this importance of learning to go together with the mitzvahs. Of course, to talk about learning in the context that the tachlis of learning is to keep mitzvahs, but there has to be that koch, that focus on learning. When I was a little boy, growing up in South Africa, before my bar mitzvah, I remember this, I have this memory of a businessman that came from overseas, and he came to us for Shabbos. And him and my father got talking. He was a frum businessman, obviously a bit of a Talmud Chacham. My father was also in business. And I remember him asking my father, he said to my father, Welche Masechta lernst du? Which Masechta are you learning? And I remember thinking to myself, that's a funny question to ask someone. It's just a childlike view. I thought to myself, that's a very funny question to ask someone. Maybe it's embarrassing. Maybe he's not learning a Masechta. Of course, my father was. He was into learning. So he answered, he was learning Masechta Bay at the time. But I thought to myself, that's a very dangerous question to ask someone. A few years later, my bar mitzvah, my Zayda Olav Shalom, took me as a present to see the Rebbe. It was my first time I saw the Rebbe. And I had the schus to go into Yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe. And as I came into the Rebbe and I gave my zettel, the Rebbe looked up at me and the first question he asked me was, Welche Masechta lernst du? Which Masechta are you learning? Which at the time was Makis, and he proceeded to test me. Baruch Hashem, I knew the answers. And I thought about it afterwards, and as I grew older, I realized that it's not just a question you ask to a bar mitzvah bacher in yeshiva. It's an eternal question. It's a question we have to all ask ourselves. Welche Masechta lernst du? What are you learning at the moment? Every yid, every person has to have something they are learning. It could be a Masechta, it could be a Perek Chumash, a Mishnayos, whatever it is. We have to be able to answer that question. What are we learning at the moment? What's our curriculum? What schedule do we have? And that's something we need to talk to our children about, and that's something we have to be able to show an example. We, both parents, need to be able to answer that question and to set an example for our children. We always have to have something that we're learning, not just once in a while to go to a shir, but we have to have something we're always learning, something we're involved in, something that we focused on. Just reflecting on Gimmel Tammuz, this is something that the Rebbe emphasized to such a great extent. Learning, there are so many hundreds of volumes printed of his Torah. There's so many different aspects of learning that he would engage in, whether it's Gemara, or Halacha, Nigla, Hasidus, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that this week is a good thing to highlight. The importance, we saw by him, this great combination of the importance of one mitzvah, on one hand, the whole idea of putting on tefillin with another yid, putting on mezuzah, but at the same time, the importance of learning. The highest, the koch, the enthusiasm when it comes to learning, and that's certainly something that we need to continuously discuss around the Shabbos table, discuss with our children, and show an example of how it's implemented. Have a good day and a good Shabbos. Could be this whole thing stop working. I believe it's...